Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. We've got a lot to cover today. We're going to be painting Christmas tea. Anything with buffalo check, I absolutely love anything with buffalo check, so we're going to be painting our little teapot. But before we get to the paint, we have a few things we got to cover from last week's live, and most importantly, that is the winners of our giveaway. So from last week, the Deco Gesso and the Matte Medium set went to Margie Eaton, and the two lettering sets went to Kathy Driggs and Carol Manhart. And the stencil set went to Judy Thacker. Ladies, thank you for joining me. And don't forget to hit that share button and leave a comment, and you get entered for this week's giveaway. And we have some really neat stuff to give away this week as well. So now, this week launched something fun. We decided to do a midweek mini class or a quickie class on the YouTube channel. And you guys were amazing as always. You really showed up in droves and commented and watched the video, and we really appreciate it. And it was a lot of fun to do it. But we did have a giveaway, and it was something special because it's sort of a lead in to the class that we're going to teach next Saturday for the live. So the winner for the Be Happy giveaway, the prize for that one is awesome. We've got a surface, a pattern, a stamp, and a set of stencil brushes. And they are going to Terry Greenhorn from Nova Scotia. So Terry, expect a parcel in the next few days. You're going to be getting a bunch of goodies in the mail. And thanks for watching. I greatly appreciate it. And thanks for hitting the subscribe button. I really appreciate that too. So today's giveaway, got to have a giveaway, have to have some sort of prezi for people to get in the mail. And we have some really good ones. We've got a great stencil set. If any of you are fans of Alessio Maggiato, you've seen his great little ice cream cones and his little gnomes. They're so stinking cute. Sheila Bergner Landry on tollpaintingdesigns.com has some free patterns of his. And we have a stencil set to give away for that waffle pattern. So there's 2 stencils in this kit, and one of you is going to win that. We also have a great set of these liners. These are Reservoir Liners in the Dynasty Faux Squirrel. These are what we used to call them pregnant liners. We have a nice set of those, a 4, a 6, and a size 8. Someone's going to win that. And then the big giveaway this week is this. This is a set of my signature stencil brushes. I love these. So there they are. So you've got a nice set of 3 and the little carrying case to go in it. So one of you is going to walk away with that. So that takes care of the giveaways. That's the YouTube channel. We're going to do another quickie class for this Wednesday. So when you join us on Wednesday on my YouTube channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button and get entered for the giveaway that we have for that as well. Now, next week's class, what are we doing? You guys have been amazing. You've been sending in suggestions and requests, and that's great because it makes my life so much simpler. And we had quite a few of you had requested daisy chain. So daisy chain it is. So we're going to be taking the metallic effect to create the chain on that frame, and then lots of bumblebees and one great big pretty daisy and some fun texture techniques, some stamping, maybe some stenciling, and some faux finishing to get that chain looking as real as possible. So that's what we are going to be doing this coming Saturday. If you are looking for the surface, it is available on my website. However, it is also available at Southern Ridge Trading, which is www.chipboard.ca. So they will be happy to help it. They're on the west coast of Canada, so they ship all over the western half of the country and all over the US. And I know that Karen Beaupre, my girl Karen, she would love to help you. So we are just about ready to get started. I told you it was all about the bees this week, so, great little mug. So I'm going to enjoy my tea, and we are going to get started on this chickadee piece. Oh, the tea is good today. Tea is really good today. So the piece that we're painting is this one. This is, it's actually really a fun piece to do. We have a little bit of buffalo check. We have a little bit of simple check, a little black and white check on it, some holly leaves and berries, and a fun technique for painting this little bird. It's really not difficult. He's very cute, very fluffy looking, and when you see the technique, you're going to realize just how easy he is to paint. And then, of course, I can't really paint anything without putting some lettering in, so we're going to talk about the lettering too. And then we're going to add a fun little 24 karat gold border to this, and Bob's your uncle, Sally's your aunt will be done. This is not a difficult piece to paint, but it is a lot of fun, and there's quite a few steps to it. So let's get started. We're going to talk about the lettering first, because there's two ways to do this. You can transfer it all on and then paint it individually, or we can start with the lettering. So I've got mine prepped just so that you can see the placement for this lettering, just to make it easy on yourself. It only covers the bottom, the cap of this teapot only covers the bottom portion of that T in Christmas. And that pretty much places it where we need it. But there's a couple of tricks to getting that done. So here I have, this is a 12 by 12 canvas. I've got 2 coats of lamp black on this. And I measured down 4 inches from the top edge of the canvas on both sides, and then drew a nice straight crisp line across the canvas using a steel edge ruler so that we get a nice clean line. Now I then went to my lettering and I drew a line straight across the bottom where the 2 outside letters meet, so it created a nice straight line. Then I position my line drawing so that that line that I drew on the canvas and the line that I drew on the lettering match up on both sides, just like so. And then I tape that into place. Now, I like to tape it into place on both ends so that it doesn't twist or it doesn't buckle, just so that it remains nice and straight. And then white graphite underneath my lettering. Of course, this is going to be obstinate and be stubborn. There we go. I'm going to pull that like so, so that I get it underneath all of the lettering. This is where that little 6-inch ruler that I was talking about comes into play. Wherever you have vertical lines, like this M for instance, make sure that that line, that vertical line, is nice and straight on all of your vertical lettering. The reason for this is that if anything is out of line, if it isn't true and it isn't straight, the eye will pick it up. And it'll drive you crazy. It drives me absolutely nuts when things are out of whack. It's like walking into someone's house where all the paintings are crooked. You want to go around and fix them all. And lettering is the same way for me. So once all of those straight lines are done, all of those curved lines can be drawn in freehand. The curves are much more forgiving than the straight lines. So just trace and transfer all your lettering just like that. Make sure everything is nice and clean. Straight, level, those are the most important things with lettering. Trace them on, and once you've got that in place, that first row, remove this one and then place the second one inside so that the M, bottom of that M, is next to that H, and the bottom of this Y is just above that A, and that will give your positioning for the lettering. It just tucks into those little open spaces. And then you end up with this. So your lettering is level and straight. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have a good straight edge ruler when you're doing lettering. It keeps everything nice and clean and very professional looking. Okay, so I have mine base coated. Oops, dropping things here. I have mine all base coated. Now the base on this is Country Red. I'm going to grab a little bit of Country Red and bring my palette a little bit closer. Now I have one coat of Country Red on here right now. I'm going to just put one more in very quickly, just to fill in any gaps that are looking a little peaky. Because we're going to stencil this, it doesn't really matter if it's fully opaque, but I just had a few little gaps here I wasn't happy with, so I just want to clean that up a little. We have, several colors going over top of this red, so it isn't really all that important to have it fully opaque, but we do want this red to sort of jump off of that surface. So make sure we've got a reasonably good coat. Just like that. Neatness doesn't count. Perfection is to be avoided at all costs. Okay, so the worst of it is taken care of. Same with this section over here. I'm more interested in the red being bright than I am in the opacity. There we go. All right. Okay, nice and red, bold. Now all of those holly berries are based the same color, and again, I'm not too worried about them being completely opaque, but I do want them fairly bright. I'm terribly lazy when it comes to base coating things, but because I use so many different layers on top of things a lot of the time, ensuring that it has an absolutely perfect base coat isn't really essential. So we're using two stencils for this one today. We're using a 1/8 check, which is a very tiny checkerboard stencil, and we're using this one, which is the buffalo check. This is the 1/2 inch buffalo check. I think it's just, I could have used the bigger one. If you have a bigger one, it would probably work just as well. But I'm kind of partial to this 1/2 inch. I like the way it looks. So I'm going to let that red dry, and we're going to talk about this little guy in here, this little bird. He is such an integral part of this design, but he's really not all that elaborate to paint. He generally uses 3 colors. I don't bother worrying about the black because the background is black, so we're going to make that work in our favor. He has a little bit of white on his face. And that's just a little bit of warm white. Now I'm going to use a rigger, I think, to paint his face. There we go. So that little bit essentially is just his cheeks. We just want his cheeks to be white. And you notice I'm not really base coating it. I'm just putting in a series of little strokes to create that texture on his face, like so. Okay, I'm going to make a little bit of noise and dry this for a sec. Patty, Piatek, you had a question, dear. What size is the canvas that I'm working on? It's a 12 by 12. All right, so I think that's dry enough that we can continue. Now, I use a stenciling technique for doing larger areas where you have lots of little bits. And that is to take a pair of scissors and cut out the lion's share of that area that is going to be stenciled and remove it from your line drawing and use this as a mask. It'll take a little time to cut that out. So I'm just going to go ahead and use mine as is and just use a little bit of care in this particular instance. So I'm going to tape my stencil in place. I always tape my stencil in place because you don't want it to shift. And I'm going to use my 1/2" stencil brush. So this is mine. I mean, you're going to have a look at this stencil brush and wonder what's up with all the little extra bits at the end here. This is a texture stencil brush. It's used for working on a variety of surfaces, not just smooth ones. So if you're working on a coarse or a rough surface with a flat stencil brush, it only hits the highest points of that texture. Whereas if you're using one with multiple layers of bristle to do this, you get it down into all layers. So it just makes things just that much easier for you in the long run. So this stenciled area is going to be done with a little bit of lamp black. Now I swirl my stencil brush in both directions so that you get a nice even distribution of paint throughout the brush, and then I just blot it a little on some paper towel. Now I'm going to start fairly close to this little bird. And I'm going to work in a circular fashion and change directions frequently. Now, when I get a little close to that white and I don't want it to overlap too much, I just gently go side to side and stay inside the confines of that area. I don't worry about what's in the background, especially because it's black. So, reload and blot, circular fashion. There's a lot of little tricks you can use to do stenciling in tight areas, but most of the time just avoiding those tight areas is the easiest. The method of cutting out the portion that you're going to stencil works very, very well. So you would cut around all of these little details. But once you do that, you have to make sure that these little details stay nice and flat. So once you tape this into place and you layer the stencil over top of it, make sure everything is secured well. The stencil is taped to the paper and the paper is taped well to the surface, and then you can work without worrying too much about ripping up all those little areas. But in this case, I'm being particularly lazy today. I think I'm just going to stencil this way. I'm going to have a look, make sure that my image is nice and clean, not too bad. Any little bits can easily be cleaned up at this point, but that cutaway paper technique alleviates a lot of that touch-ups Okay, I think, yep, I'm happy with that. There we go. So I'm just going to quickly clean up a couple of little spots because, you know, I made a mess. It's one of those days I can make a mess. Just like so. There's a lot of shading and whatnot yet to go in here, so I'm not going to putz too much with it. Okay. Lovely. So from this point, I'm going to start shading this little teapot. I'm going to do that with my 1/2" angle. Now, the shading color on this red is soft black. And there's a reason why I choose soft black over lamp black for shading reds. I find that using black on red, although it will shade it well, it's very harsh. Soft black has got a little hint of red in it, so it shades reds very, very nicely. So get that brush full of water. More here. So the shading that's going to go around this little bird and in here needs to be a little stronger. Okay, there we go. So in behind that little bird. Now you can take the tip of that brush and in these little areas in behind the leaves, just tuck a little of that soft black. It's not going to paint it completely black, but it is going to give you a nice shaded tone for that background. And under here. So all of those areas in and around turn this. I love soft black on red. It shades nicely and it doesn't look harsh. It makes the color quite subtle. And if you do all of this shading first, then a lot of the other stuff gets so much simpler. I keep running out of water in this brush. There we go. Now I'm going to go up the back of this pot. And it needs to be quite strong. I need to make this shadow quite a bit stronger. I'm going to pull a little of that out. Oh, somebody has a question. We're scrolling through trying to find that question. Did I stencil before adding the birds and the leaves? No, I always put my line drawings all on at the same time. I would rather mask it off or hide it before afterwards. Generally, I would base coat the pot. Did I base coat the white before applying the red? No, I always put my white on last. I can't even really explain why. Just habit. I always start with the darker colors and go to the light. So there, I've got a nice shadow in the back there. Nice part is I can adjust these shadows as I work. So if I'm not happy with them at any given time, I can adjust them. Here we go. And we're going to put a shadow along the base of this spout here and up here on the back side of the spout. Now there is a shadow that goes inside the spout in here, and it's just a little curve, little float, just like that. And I use the heel of the brush to soften it out. There. Now we're cooking with gas now. Now those shadows, all of that soft black goes wherever there is red. So shade the back side of these little knobs and the cap to the teapot. You'll notice I don't putz with my floats. I just put them in. We're just getting those shadows in place. Those can all be adjusted as you work. Whenever something doesn't quite look dark enough, I'll let it dry and then I'll put another layer on. And I can continue to do that until I'm satisfied that the shadows are deep enough. We're almost there. Certainly enough for this go around. I'm going to grab my heat gun here for just a sec. Now I will make some noise. There we go. Sorry about that. My sound guy usually will turn off the sound so you're not bothered by that noise, but he had to step out for a moment. Put a little bit more shadow along the top of his head. There we go. I work with thin layers of color. I don't usually use strong floats right off the bat. There's usually a lot of water or a lot of glaze in my brush because I prefer to be able to layer the colors to get what I want. It lends you an awful lot more control if you can do it that way. See, our little teapot is coming along. So now I'm going to switch over to my tiny little 1/8 stencil. This little 1/8, it is tiny, and I'm going to position it just like so. And again, with the lamp black, this time I'm going to use a much smaller stencil brush. I'm using a 1/4 inch stencil brush. This one is a Stencil Pro. The reason I'm using a smaller stencil brush is because the space I'm working in is also much smaller. So a 1/2 inch might be too big for this space. So I'm going with a 1/4 inch in the Stencil Pro. So there is my little border there. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm not using a lot of paint on this brush, it's just a tiny bit. There we go. There. I've got those little checks in already. I'm going to give that. Oh, I have another question. Oh, did I put, I'm sorry, Mary. That's not what I meant. Did you put any color under the red so it would pop more? I did not in this case. Most of the time I will mix gesso with base color and put that on if I really want it to be quite bright, but I really didn't in this case. And the country red that I used is quite opaque already, so I usually go with just 1 or 2 coats of red over black. If I'm working with a slightly different red, I will either use a lavender or a 1-to-1 mix of the red with the white gesso, and then that'll give me a much more opaque background with the more clear reds. But I didn't do anything with this one. Am I using glaze medium or water on my brush? Today I'm using water, mainly because my glaze medium is out of reach. That's the only reason, but most of the time I use my Jo Sonja's glaze medium for floating and shading. But I'm also waiting for an order of it, and this is all I have left. So today I am using water. Is it a heat gun or a hair dryer? It's a heat gun. For these videos, I've gotten in the habit of using a heat gun simply for the sake of expediency. In general, I don't like using a heat gun. I prefer cool air. So I'll use a fan without heat, or I will use a hair dryer with no heat. Simply because I find with the heat gun, it is very easy to heat it too long and then the paint bubbles or blisters, or it can cause some other issues. I prefer to use a hair dryer on no heat to dry my paint if I need to quickly, but for the sake of expediency, I'm using a heat gun. Mine has 2 settings, so I'm using it on its lowest possible setting so I'm not cooking the paint on my surface. Now, I'm just going to quickly clean up a couple of things here that I goofed on. And then I'm going to grab my angle and I'm going to deepen that shadow on the back of that right here. Now, when I'm doing this, I really like to sort of make that back edge dark enough that you can still see it, but that it sort of kind of softens and disappears into that black background. I just love how it looks. So I'm going to deepen this shadow back here again. Liking it. So yeah, our pot is taking shape quite nicely. So I'm going to come down here to this edge on this teapot. You notice there's 2 little bands on either side of that checkerboard. There's a couple of different ways you can handle this. You can use metallic gold paint with the Extreme Sheen Metallic. The 24 karat gold works beautifully. If you're feeling particularly lazy, you can use one of these. This is a Deco Color 24 karat gold paint pen. I use them for doing borders all the time. A Krylon 18 karat gold paint pen will do the same thing. So you have a couple of options. You can draw in that border using your gold paint pen, or you can use the Extreme Sheen Metallics for that. I like this because it's got a nice point and I can control it quite easily. So I'm just going to quickly put that border in, one above and one below that little border, just like that. And there's a couple of little spots elsewhere that are gold, like these little borders here on the handle can be drawn in. And these little areas here on the back, these 2 buttons on the back of the handle, those can be done as well. Just keep in mind that these pens are oil-based, so they take a minute to dry. There we go. So I've got my border in down at the bottom and I have my little details done on my handle. I'm going to grab a 1/4 inch angled shader and I'm going to take a little bit of white because the 2 bars that are holding the handle on are left black, but we need to separate them from the background. So I'm going to put a little highlight on the top edge of that piece. And I think mine's just a tad too strong, but we'll adapt and adjust it. Just a little highlight. And again, it comes back to that sort of lost edge. You can take a small amount of white and just put a weak float at the bottom as well, like that. And our handle is just about done. I'm going to take a little asphaltum. I know you're probably wondering how come I hadn't broke that out already, but I'm going to take a little asphaltum. Now we have some white here that needs shading on these, on that back side of those white areas. I'm just going to put a float of the white like that, and in here. I went to asphaltum for these shadows because the black would have been too harsh against that white. You can deepen it later with the black, or with the soft black, but I like to start with the asphaltum. It just keeps things looking a little warmer. And I'm going to do the same here. Just like so. So we got that shadow there. I'm going to come down here. Yep, the gold is dry. Put a little asphaltum there and in here, and walk that out a little bit. Not bad. So now we've got shadows here and here on the back side there. We need to add a few highlights to this pot. Now, this initial set of highlights is not going to be strong. So I'm using a small amount of warm white, and it's heavily thinned. And I want to put highlight in. Now I'm coming about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of that pot. And I'm just putting a weak float down the side. And I'm going to do the same thing on the spout here. About 1/8 of an inch in. And here. Oops. There we go. Now it's fairly loose and it is not meticulous. It's just creating a space for the highlight. And we are going to do more with that. See, that pot is taking shape quickly. So I'm going to use, you zoom in when I do the birds, absolutely, because there's a lot of detail in that one. Do I like asphaltum better than burnt umber for shading? Yes. Umbers were developed to flatten out color, and I've always found that burnt umber subdued things more than I wanted them to. The asphaltum is more of a yellow based brown as opposed to a red. Burnt umber has a lot of red in it. I like that it remains very transparent and that you get great color. It warms things up without making them, taking the life out of the color. So that is the reason that I use asphaltum so much. Another question, what color white am I using? I am using warm white. I very rarely use titanium white when I paint. It's usually warm white. Now, I'm going to use a little bit of that warm white on a dry brush. The brush I'm using is an extra large Mezzaluna, which is kind of like the Crescent blenders. I love these brushes. So I'm going to use my dry brush to create a highlight. And I'm using that line that we did at the beginning as my starting point. Now, I am not applying a whole lot of color to this. I want that brightest point to be right here. There we go. And I'm going to do the same thing to the spout. Now there's two impact points on the spout. There's one in this curve and one on the outer curve. So I'm going to pay a little more attention to those two areas right there. And the same here. And again here. They're just light little dry brushes. I'm not working too hard on this one. It's just to make those light impact points stand out. There we go. So we have two elements left to really talk about. The leaves are going to be fairly quick, same with the berries. But I really want to take some time to explain how to paint this bird, because that seems to be where people have the most questions with this particular piece. So we're going to move on and paint this little bird because he's going to require a little explanation. So the color I'm using, is, I can't remember if it's burlap or I can't remember what the color is in the pattern, but it's a soft tan color, a very soft tan color, quite neutral. And you're going to use a 1/4 inch angled shader because he's so small. If he was larger, I would use a larger brush. So he's going to zoom in on this bird. Now I am tip loading my brush with that neutral, that tan, and you're going to blend it out as if you're going to float, because technically you're going to float. So we're going to start with the tail. Now the tail is just a chisel blend. You stand the brush on its chisel edge and pull back and let the color run out, like so. It's as simple as that. These pin feathers on the wings are actually a C-stroke, like so, and pulled back. And that forms the feathers on the wing. The shorter feathers overlap the first row, and it's just a C-stroke, like that. And each successive row or following row is done the same way. So they overlap to create those feathers. Just like so. It creates some interesting little textures in there. Now, while I have that on my brush, I'm going to pick up a tiny amount of warm white, and I'm going to add a highlight to those tail feathers, and the same to each of those little feathers I've already done, just to give them a little brightness. Easy peasy. So now we need that fluffy little belly. You can see on the original, misplaced my original. You can see how he looks pretty fluffy in here, and that's a very easy technique. So you tip load again, make sure you've got some water in the brush, tip load again, blend as if you're going to float, blend it out, pick up a small touch of white on the tip of the brush and just a tiny amount, and blend again. And you're going to start down here at his derriere, and right on the edge of it, you're going to tap and pull 3 or 4 little strokes, like so. And then the next row is going to overlap just a little bit. And I usually do it in little groupings of 3. I don't know why, it just, force of habit, I like that rule of thirds, I guess. Just little groupings. And they should layer like fish scales. And then you just change the curve of them as you go along this little bird's chest. And you can see he's getting quite fluffy until we get up under his chin. Now I like to come back and add little brighter highlights here and there, particularly on his chest. And it's just touching the chisel edge to the surface. And you can see how fluffy he is. Now we have to separate some of these feathers because he looks kind of gray and we need to warm him up a little. So I'm going to load that angled shader with a little bit of asphaltum, and I'm going to float along the underside of his wing, like so. And where these little things overlap, you can see where that darkest area is under some of those feathers. And you can do the same thing here where the feathers overlap, like so. And it warms this little guy up. So I'm going to add a little dip dot of white. Now I'm using the handle of my brush for this. I'm going to add a dip dot of white for where his eye goes. And I'm going to quickly dry this. So I have this little white spot for his eye, and then I'm going to take that little dip dot again, just make it slightly smaller so it leaves a little fine line of white around the eye. It's very difficult to put a very teeny tiny line of white around the eye when it's this small. So, and I'm going to take a little of that warm white and a touch of asphaltum, and I'm going to stroke in his beak a little bit here. I don't really use a color for his beak because it gets a little lost in there. And I want those highlights on his feathers to be a little brighter, so I'm going to pop a little more in. It's only going to make him look fluffier. Every time you put a layer on this little guy, it just gets a little fluffier. And there's a little spot under his chin here I want to brighten. There we go. Now, so we've got all of this in, but he still looks a little bit ragged. So I'm going to clean up some of this white and just make sure that there's some soft little lines like so that come up into his cap and down onto his wing. And then we have to accent the top of his head. I generally try to keep the floats as weak as possible when I'm floating over black, because honestly you really don't need much. But I'm going to put a little highlight on the top of his head and down onto his beak. And as soon as that little black eye is dry, I'm going to put in a tiny little highlight of white. Just a tiny little dot, as small as I can make it. You can always come back in and add little tiny fine lines of detail wherever you feel they're needed. Don't be shy. If you want his chest to be a little fluffier, by all means, make him a little fluffier. I'm just going to puff him up a little. I like my chickadees fluffy. There we go. He works up fairly quick. Now his feet, I really don't do much with. They're tucked underneath him and they're on a black background. But if you feel the need, you can always, stroke in something a bit more solid or more defined if you choose to. I generally don't, because by the time we're done, he's pretty much tucked down in those holly leaves anyway. So I don't worry too much about them. I think he's adorable. He's so cute. Fat, fluffy little chickadees. Now, this little guy can get shaded with a little more asphaltum. I'm constantly adjusting colors anyway, so it's just force of habit. Put a little bit of asphaltum on the back of that white just so that he has a nice little shadow. Adjusting shadows as you go is always a good idea. I'm going to pop up a little highlight on his pin feathers here. There we go. All right. So now we are getting very close. We need to start doing something with these holly leaves and these berries. Now those berries are shaded with the soft black, just like we did on the pots. You can easily be a little more heavy-handed with the color on these ones because they're small and indistinct. You can, as long as you leave a fair amount of red showing, you're okay. I do the same thing over here on these ones. Again, using a black background when you're shading with dark colors is saves you a lot of heartache. and a lot of headache. Okay, so my berries are going to get a highlight with a little touch of warm white. Again, that float's going to be weak, weak, weak. And I always come in from the edge on the berries for the highlight, just a little. I don't take it right to the edge. I come in just a little bit. It just seems to help define them a little without making the edges disappear. Now when it comes to floating, a lot of us call it the F word because nobody really likes to float. It's something that requires adapting and a lot of brush control. Getting used to what is the right amount of water in your brush, what is the right amount of paint. It is something you learn over time. It is not something that you can just pull off in an afternoon. It is something that has to be practiced. And it happens over time. You don't have to sit down and practice your floating every single day, but make sure that you take the time to adjust and learn how to load the brush full of water, how to get just the right amount of paint in it. After a while, it becomes second nature, and it's something that you get a grip on over time. So don't beat yourself up too much if your floats aren't absolutely perfect. God knows mine aren't. So I have a little bit of plantation pine on my messy, messy palette. And I have, where's my matcha green? Matcha green. There it is. This is one of Decwart's new colors this year, this matcha green. I really like it. Now, I've base coated my leaves with antique green, and as you can see, they are not fully opaque. Antique green is sort of semi-transparent, so it doesn't cover very well in one coat. Usually takes 3 to get nice opaque coverage, but in this particular case, it's really not all that important. The reason being is that I'm using a very opaque color for my highlight color. I'm also using a blue opaque on this, so there's 2 opaque colors going over top of this, and then I'm using a transparent green to do the shading. So that will help us in the end, having that transparent color to do the shading. We're going to get lots of texture and nice shadows, but the 2 opaque colors that we're putting over top of it will help bury a lot of these imperfections in the surface. So I'm really not worried about having an absolutely perfect base coat on these leaves. So I'm going to work with I think a 1/2 inch is too big. I'm going to work with a 3/8 angled shader. Some people are very comfortable using large brushes in tight areas. I prefer to get the whole chisel edge of my brush on the surface when I'm painting. That means that the whole brush has to fit inside the area that I'm working. And in this case, a 3/8 will work perfectly in that space. So I'm going to start with the matcha green. And again, I'm going to tip load the brush and blend as if I'm going to float. So let's start out here so you can see how I paint these leaves, and see if we can't zoom in a little tighter on this spot so you can see what I'm doing. So I like to take that matcha green and I kind of put a float on the edge of the leaf. Not quite enough paint. Now I stand the brush on the chisel edge and I pull the color back towards the center of the leaf. And tap and pull. But you notice I turn the brush to follow the shape of the leaf. So now I've got that highlight on that edge of that leaf. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, but it's going to be a bit more abbreviated. It's not as pronounced as on the first one. Even just a float will work in this case. And now I'm going to put a float down the center of that leaf, right there. So you can see it instantly shaped that leaf. And now I'm going to pick up that plantation pine, load and blend as if you're going to float. Turn this around. And I put the darkest value towards the center at the bottom of the leaf. Lay the whole brush on the surface like that and pull it up to the point. Gives you a nice shape on your leaf. Now, I have a blue in this particular pattern. It's the color that I'm using for the lettering on this. And it's called Aqua Sky, if I can find it. Close enough. There we go. So that pretty blue, it's a soft blue. I'm going to load my brush as if to float, but with only a small amount of that blue on the brush. Now, I am carrying the color from up here down here. And this is a trick for unifying and enhancing highlights. But it essentially carries the color from one portion of the painting to another. And you don't have to use a lot of it. But I do recommend that you try to do it. So a little bit of that blue does two things. One, it carries the color from up here to down here. And the second thing it does is it enhances the highlights on these leaves. Whenever you have a color, in this particular case we have the reds and the greens, I've moved the greens from this side of the canvas to this side by having a small cluster of leaves here. The red is carried around by the berries here. The neutrals are neutral. You don't really have to worry about moving those anywhere. But up here we have blue lettering. Well, blue lettering is alone and by itself. So in order to carry the color throughout the painting to give it a more unified feel, I like to pull the color down onto the leaves. So in this case, I'm using that beautiful blue that we use for the lettering, that Aqua Sky. So it has a twofold impact. It creates the ability, it carries the color and unifies the image, and at the same time it enhances the highlights on the leaves. You could also do this with red if we didn't have that up there. You wanted to use some of the red that was in this and pop it onto the leaves, that works too. I'm going to put a little matcha green onto these little leaves here. I almost forgot about them. And I like these little leaves. So let's do one more leaf. I'm going to tip load. Where did my brush go? Oh, there it is. I'm going to tip load my 3/8. Let's do one over here. And you can see what I mean about that using those two opaque colors. It does change how those leaves look. So I've got a little float, and then I tap and pull, chisel blend that color down towards the center of the leaf, like so. And then on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. Just narrower. This chisel blend technique also gives the leaves a nice little bit of texture too, without being too heavy-handed. And there is that float down the middle, like so. And rinse the brush and pick up the plantation pine. Blend well so that you get a good float. I'm just going to pull this around so I can see what I'm doing. I like to float from the bottom of the leaf out. Lay that brush right on the surface. You'll get a much nicer float that way. So there we have nice definition in the center of that leaf. And then I'm going to pick up that little bit of blue sky or aqua sky. And I'm going to pull a little of that into the highlight area on that leaf. And a couple of points. Just like that. Fast and easy way to do leaves. I mean, they do look nicely curved. We get great impact, light impact in there. So then those berries get a final highlight, little touch of white. I don't like big dots, so tiny little ones for the highlights on this. We're looking for a question again. Do I always do one leaf at a time? Yes, I do. And I usually complete them. And the reason for that is then I can adjust shadows and highlights as I go. Okay, Peggy. All right, so I've got one leaf in there. I'm trying to learn. Did you consider a green for the lettering? No, I didn't. I tend to stay away from green for lettering, particularly on black, because it doesn't contrast all that well. Not for me. I prefer the lettering to be nice and bright. It's a matter of personal choice. If you wanted to paint the lettering green, you could certainly do it that way. But for myself, I prefer to have the blue. It's a nice balance. These are all very warm tones, and I like the cooler color of the light blue. And it also has nice opacity. I don't have to fight against the background. All right, so I've done a couple of the leaves. We've got the pot completed. Our little bird is completed. He is very cute. I do like him. And so now we have to talk about this lettering. This week we had quite a few brushes come in. They went out almost as fast as we got them. In fact, we were unpacking one box and loading them into other things. So I do have some more. They will be here Monday. So if you're looking for them, this is the brush that I use for my lettering. This is a number 2 rigger. I also use a 0 or a 4 from time to time, but ideally my workhorse is this number 2. And the reason for it is this. Let me give you a comparison. Let's grab a liner brush here. Or maybe we won't. I might not have one in here. Oh yeah, I have a liner. Okay, so I have a liner brush. It comes to a very fine point, and it is designed for doing detailing, fine lines and details. A rigger brush, although they are built in similar ways, it comes to sort of a blunt end. So it forms a chisel edge when you press down on it, like a square chisel edge. So it opens up entirely different from a liner brush. A liner brush will open up almost like a round brush and create a curved or a teardrop shape, whereas the rigger will form a straight chisel edge. And it makes it great for doing lettering. So you need to get it full of water and then load it up with paint. And I just loaded it up with the wrong color. So lots of water. And I'm going to use this Aqua Sky, which is this pretty blue. Same one I used to float on the leaves down here. And load it up so the brush is nice and full. And there is a difference between having paint on your brush and having paint in your brush. This is full of paint. It's in the brush. This is paint on the brush. If there is a gob on the brush at any point, then it's not well blended into it. We need paint in the brush. Then you can tap it on your palette to open it up. Do you see that chisel edge, how square that rigger is? It's nice and clean and ideal for this. So I'm going to start right here at the top of this S, and you notice I have that chisel square to the top of the letter. And I pull it, I press down to open up the brush till it fills the space, and then release it back up onto the chisel edge. Press down to open it up to fill the space, and then back onto the chisel edge. So all of those little fine lines that you see in the lettering, that chisel edge does that beautifully. Paint in the brush, square, press down, open it up, back up onto the chisel edge. Square, press down, open it up, back onto the chisel edge. All those little connecting bits can be done after the fact. Don't try to get it all done in one go. Just watch. Now, again, this comes back to brush control. This is something you can practice. Just take a liner or a ruler, sorry, and give yourself about an inch and just practice writing your own name with the brush. You'll get used to having those nice, clean, straight lines. Another trick when you're painting lettering or even doing fine line work is instead of looking where you are, look where you're going. So don't worry too much about where your brush is, just where you need to go. You get used to how the brush works in your hand and how it feels and how much pressure you need to get the brush to do what you want it to do. Again, it's just getting used to it. Learning to control that brush is practice, practice, practice. So there it is. That is Brush Lettering 101 with a rigger. Now you can come back in after the fact with a Factus black eraser and remove all of those chalk lines, those graphite marks. They will come off fairly easily. And the minute you get rid of them, your lettering is going to look nice and crisp and clean. And because we took the time to get the vertical and horizontal lines straight. The lettering is vertically straight and horizontally straight, and it looks nice and clean and finished. So I'm going to do one last. I'm going to get that C done so you can turn that this way. I might have a little too much in here, but so square to the top, press down, open the brush up to fill the space, come back up on the chisel edge. And then use that chisel edge to do all of those fine lines. Now you can paint up to 1/4 inch wide with a number 2 rigger. It will fill a space almost 1/4 of an inch wide. So it's the ideal brush for doing this type of lettering for the type of work that we do. Obviously, if you're going to be working on larger lettering, then a larger brush is required, but a good old number 2 will be a workhorse for you. It's my favorite brush. So we have done some lettering, we've done some stenciling, we have painted leaves and berries, and I showed you how to paint this cute little bird. This is a really fun piece. We have one last step to do, and that is using our gold paint pen and a steel edge ruler. Now, I tell you I'm a lazy painter, and most of you don't believe me, but this is how lazy I am. I have a 1-inch ruler. I don't think it's actually a 1 inch thick. I think it's 1.5 inches. Okay, it's 1.25 inches. So this one's about 1.25 inches. So the border is going to be about 1.25 inches in. So my line will come down here. And then I stop about 1.25 inches from the edge. How badly did I mess it? Not quite. Okay, I'll go a little further. 1.25 inches. There we go. And I turn it this way. And it's always the width of the ruler. I stop about 1.25 inches. There we go. Now, when you get to your lettering, you're not going to go all the way across. You're going to stop just shy of the lettering. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And I'm going to stop shy of the greenery in the corner. And I stop shy of the lettering. There we go. That is as difficult as that gets. Always use the width of the ruler to create it and then stop where the design stops. So that's it. That is how difficult it is to paint this Christmas tea piece. It was pretty fast, pretty fun. There's some simple techniques in it. You see the marker? This is it here. This is a deco color. These ones are available on Amazon. They're made by Yoshida, which is a great paint company. They are oil-based. They do take a few minutes to dry, but the metallic is very, very bright. It's a great paint pen. Hi guys. I hope you had fun doing that. This was a lot of fun for me. I enjoy doing this. This is great fun, and I really am enjoying doing these live classes every Saturday with you, and also doing the one that we're doing midweek on YouTube. That one's also fun. We're doing a little mini class. This week we're doing a Christmas ornament for the mini class. It's going to be a cute little Santa that you'll be able to hang on your tree. Some fun techniques for that. Next week's class here for the live is called Daisy Chain. The one over my shoulder here with the big daisy and the bumblebees. That's a fun piece with a great faux finish for that chain. So hopefully you'll join me for that one. The pattern and the surface are both available on my website. The surface is also available from Southern Ridge Trading, which is chipboard.ca. And she ships all over the place. So, and her service is great. She's fantastic. So what else? Oh yes, the drawing. Don't forget, hit the share button, make a comment in the comment section, and you'll be automatically entered for the drawing for the set of my signature stencil brushes, that set of the Reservoir Liners, and the stencil set for Alessio Micciato's patterns that are available on Sheila Landry's website, which is tollpaintingdesigns.com. Okay guys, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. Don't forget, comment, share. Love you all. Stay safe. Bye.